The winding country road, barely more than a gravel track, seemed to curl tighter with every mile, pulling me deeper into an isolation I'd only ever romanticized. My sedan, usually gleaming from my meticulous care, was now coated in a fine ochre dust, a testament to the journey and the neglected landscape it traversed. I gripped the steering wheel, my grip tight, a familiar tension in my jaw. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the quiet hum of anticipation, the almost surgical precision with which I approached any new challenge. As an antique restorer, my life was a symphony of patience, an unwavering dedication to the forgotten beauty in decay. This inheritance, this manor, promised decay on a scale I hadn't yet encountered. The sun, a pallid disk in a bruised sky, cast long, skeletal shadows of ancient trees across the road. The air grew heavier, cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old, like rust on forgotten iron. My GPS, after hours of intermittent signal, had finally given up, its screen a blank, mocking void, but I didn't need it. The road itself had become a funnel, narrowing, compressing, leading me to a singular, inevitable point. Then through a break in the gnarled oaks, I saw it. The manor. It didn't stand so much as crouch, a hulking, skeletal presence against the horizon. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, wrestled with the masonry, clinging to every crevice, threatening to reclaim the structure entirely. It was immense, overwhelming, a monument to a forgotten past, and it was mine. I parked the sedan in front of a pair of colossal wrought-iron gates, rusted shut and half swallowed by overgrown bushes. The driveway beyond was a choked path of weeds and cracked flagstones. I retrieved a heavy set of keys from my satchel, the largest one a crude, ancient thing of blackened iron. It scraped against the lock, a sound like dry bones grinding, before the mechanism groaned and grudgingly gave way. The gates swung inward with a shriek, revealing a long, desolate avenue leading to the manor's front door. Stepping out of the car, the silence was immediate and profound, a thick blanket muffling the world. I walked the length of the overgrown drive, my boots crunching on loose gravel, a tiny, insignificant figure approaching a titan. The closer I got, the more the details resolved themselves into a horrifying tapestry of neglect. Broken gargoyles leered from cornices, their faces eroded by centuries of weather. A massive oak door studded with iron stood at the entrance, its paint flaking away like diseased skin. Again I produced the large iron key. It slid into the lock with surprising ease, a practiced fit. A single turn, a heavy thunk, and the door swung inward, not with a creak, but a deep, resonant sigh that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. The interior was a cavern of gloom. A vast entrance hall stretched before me, illuminated only by slivers of weak light filtering through grimy, leaded windows high above. Dust motes danced in these hesitant shafts, like tiny, frantic spirits. The air was thick, heavy, carrying the scent of mildew, forgotten paper, and something else, something indefinable and ancient, stagnant odor that prickled at the back of my throat. I stood for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, taking in the scale of the task ahead. Stripped tapestries hung in tatters from the walls, my breath plumed in the cold air. I moved deeper, my hand trailing along a wall, feeling the rough, cold stone. Each step felt like an intrusion. I found a drawing room filled with shrouded furniture that looked like sleeping giants. The library, its shelves empty save for a few rotting tomes, smelled of decay and forgotten knowledge. My curiosity, a professional instinct, pulled me further. I found myself in what must have been a study, its heavy wooden desk covered in a century of dust. It looked out of place, somehow newer than the rest of the room's furnishings, yet still ancient. My fingers traced the intricate carvings on its doors, my restorer's eye already assessing the damage, the potential. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course. I produced a small set of skeleton keys from my pocket, my tools of the trade, and after a few precise attempts, I felt the satisfying click of the tumbler. Inside, it was empty, save for a single, small wooden box no bigger than my palm, no discernible lock, no clasp. Just a faint seam around its middle. I ran my thumb along it, pressing lightly, and the top half lifted away. The box was empty, but inside, carefully pressed into the bottom, was a single, faded drawing. It depicted a child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, rendered in stark, charcoal lines. The face was gaunt, almost emaciated, and the eyes were the unsettling part. There was no joy, no innocence, only a profound, ancient emptiness. The child's mouth was a thin, downturned line, but it was the eyes that held me. They felt like a direct gaze, an accusation. A sudden, jarring image flashed through my mind, unbidden, violent. Not of the manor, but of a vast, sterile room, fluorescent lights humming, a long table, and the distant, muffled clatter of cutlery. Mess hall during lockdown? What was that? A flicker of disorientation, a fragment of a nightmare from a sleep I couldn't recall. I stared back at the drawing, the child's empty eyes seeming to deepen to pull me in. This was not merely decay I had inherited. This was something else, something that watched, something that waited, and I had just opened the door. The gravel road had given way to a rough-hewn path that ended abruptly at the Manor's imposing iron gates. They groaned open, protesting with a sound like grinding bones, and I drove through, leaving the last vestiges of the outside world behind. The house loomed, a silhouette against a bruised sky, more edifice than home. Its sheer scale, once a romantic ideal, now felt like a burden, a vast, silent repository of forgotten things. My first few days were a blur of unpacking and initial assessment. I moved through the empty rooms, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay, a symphony of creaks and groans accompanying my every step. I chose a small, relatively intact bedroom for myself, a temporary sanctuary from the Manor's overwhelming presence. The real work, the meticulous, painstaking process I lived for, had to begin. I decided to start with the lower levels, a pragmatic choice given the structural concerns. After some exploration, I found it, a cavernous room at the back of the house, far from the grand reception halls. It was clearly designed for utility, not elegance, with long, heavy tables bolted to the floor and a vast, soot-stained hearth dominating one wall. The windows, high and narrow, were boarded from the outside, plunging the space into perpetual twilight even at midday. A faded, hand-painted sign, barely legible above a rusted service door, read, "Mess Hall." Beneath it, scratched into the plaster, were the words, "During lockdown." The phrase sent a shiver down my spine, a jarring note in the otherwise silent, forgotten house. What kind of lockdown? Who had been confined here? This room, the mess hall during lockdown, would be my first project. It was a blank canvas of neglect, perfect for my particular brand of resurrection. I hauled in my toolboxes, my drop cloths, my cleaning supplies, arranging them with the precise order I always maintained. My brushes, my solvents, my delicate scrapers each had its place. I began with the tables, their surfaces caked with decades of grime, revealing glimpses of scarred, dark wood beneath. The air, already heavy, grew thick with the disturbed dust, catching the weak shafts of light that managed to penetrate the high, grimy windows. I worked methodically, my focus absolute, the rhythmic scrape of my putty knife against dried varnish a comforting sound in the oppressive quiet. Hours melted away. I paused, stretching my aching back, and reached for the small, curved chisel I'd been using to pry away a stubborn layer of lacquer. It wasn't there. I scanned the table, then the floor around my feet. My tools were always laid out in a specific sequence, a habit ingrained over decades. I knew with an almost physical certainty where it should be. A flicker of annoyance. I must have set it down somewhere else, distracted by a particularly resistant patch. I walked to my toolbox, rummaging through the felt-lined compartments. Nothing. I retraced my steps, searching the adjacent tables, even checking under the drop cloths. My brow furrowed. It was a distinctive tool, not easily misplaced. Then I saw it. Lying on the floor, tucked beneath the leg of one of the heavy tables near the far wall. I hadn't been near that wall in hours. A prickle of unease ran through me. I picked it up, examining it. I shrugged it off. Old houses settled, things moved. Perhaps I'd kicked it inadvertently and forgotten. My mind was tired. I resumed my work, trying to recapture my focus. Different, it wasn't empty. It was holding something. I found myself listening, not to the faint sounds of the old house settling, but for something else. A breath, a rustle, a shift of weight. A faint scratching sound started, a rhythmic scrape that seemed to emanate from the wall beside the enormous hearth. I froze, my hand hovering over a half-clean tabletop. It wasn't the wind, the air was still. It wasn't a rodent, the sound was too deliberate, too slow, like fingernails dragging across stone. Scratch, pause, my breath caught in my throat. I stood absolutely still, straining my ears. The sound stopped. I waited, heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The echo swallowed it whole, leaving no trace. I told myself it was my imagination, fueled by the isolation and the sheer strangeness of the old manor. Old houses had 1,000 noises. It wasn't just the dampness of the old stone. There was nothing, of course, just dust motes dancing in the weak light. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, an intense, unwavering gaze that seemed to bore into the back of me. It was a predatory awareness, not curious but assessing. I forced myself back to the table, my hands trembling slightly as I picked up my tools. My meticulous rhythm was broken, replaced by a frantic energy. I needed to finish this section, to find some small victory in this vast, unsettling space. I began to scrape at a particularly stubborn patch near the table's edge, where the wood met a thick iron band. As I worked, my scraper snagged on something. Not wood, not grime, metal. I leaned closer, carefully prying away the layers of accumulated dirt and varnish. Beneath the iron band, deeply etched into the wood, was a series of symbols. Not letters, not numbers, but crude, angular carvings, almost like a forgotten script. They were arranged in a tight cluster, surrounding a central, deeper gouge, a circular indentation, as if something had been pressed there with immense force. They felt ancient, imbued with a strange, unsettling energy. This wasn't just a mess hall. This was a place where something had been done, something desperate, something that had left its mark not just on the wood, but on the very air of the room. I wasn't restoring a house, I was unearthing a tomb, and whatever lay buried within it was now awake. The silence that followed my whispered hello was not merely the absence of sound. It was a profound, waiting stillness, heavy and ancient. It pressed in on me, a physical weight against my eardrums, and I found myself holding my breath, straining to catch the faintest creak or shift. Nothing. Only the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light from the high, grimy windows, oblivious to my sudden terror. I let out the breath in a slow, shaky stream. My mind, ever the pragmatist, immediately sought a logical explanation. Old houses settled. Timbers groaned. Perhaps a gust of wind had found its way through a loose pane, creating a strange resonance. It had to be something like that. The alternative, that I was not alone, that something unseen had responded to my presence, was too unsettling to entertain. The grand hall with its peeling wallpaper and skeletal chandelier still held too many secrets for a single afternoon. I needed to focus, to ground myself in the tangible work of restoration. My current task was the library, a smaller, more intimate space off the main corridor. Its walls were lined with built-in shelving, currently empty save for cobwebs and the ghosts of forgotten tomes. My fingers, calloused from years of working with wood and solvents, traced a particularly stubborn patch near the base of a tall bookshelf. The grain beneath the accumulated filth felt different here, subtly uneven. I ran my thumb over it again, a prickle of professional curiosity overriding the lingering unease from the hall. It wasn't just a knot in the wood, nor a patch of dried sap. There was a faint, almost imperceptible seam running vertically then horizontally, forming a neat rectangle. My tools were laid out on a drop cloth nearby, a set of fine chisels, a soft brush, a small, powerful flashlight. I picked up the light, directing its beam onto the seam. Dust, thick and undisturbed, coated it, but beneath the line was too perfect, too deliberate to be natural. This was an access panel, a hidden compartment. A thrill, sharp and clean, cut through the tension. This was the kind of discovery that made the arduous work worthwhile. I carefully scraped away the dust with the edge of a plastic spudger, revealing the faint outline of a small, almost flush-fitting door. There was no handle, no keyhole. It was designed to be forgotten, to disappear into the paneling. I ran my fingers along the edges, searching for a release mechanism. My thumb brushed against a barely raised spot in the oak, just above the top right corner of the panel. I pressed it. A soft, almost inaudible click echoed in the quiet room. The panel, with a sigh of displaced air, sprang inward a fraction of an inch. I pulled the panel open fully. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a small, cramped space no more than 2 feet deep. It was empty save for a single item, a leather-bound journal resting on a rough wooden shelf. The leather was cracked and dry, corners worn smooth with time. It felt heavy, substantial, as if weighted with secrets. I pulled it out, cradling it carefully in my hands. The air in the cavity seemed to sigh again as I removed it, a faint, almost imperceptible current. I carried the journal to the window, letting the weak afternoon light fall across its cover. There was no title, no name, just the raw, aged hide. I opened it, the brittle pages creaking in protest. The handwriting was cramped, precise, in faded black ink. It wasn't a personal diary, not exactly. It was a chronicle, a collection of observations and warnings. The entries were fragmented, disjointed, spanning what looked like decades. They spoke of the manor, but not of its architecture or its grandeur. They spoke of it, always it. A presence that siphoned, that thinned the veil, that fed on the very threads of self. There were references to the forgetting. One entry, dated nearly a century ago, caught my eye, a mess hall during lockdown. The image that flashed into my mind was sharp, disorienting. Not of this old manor, but of a stark, institutional room, fluorescent lights buzzing, the clatter of plastic trays, and a profound, unnerving quiet among the occupants. Their eyes in that fleeting mental image were vacant, unfocused. I shook my head, trying to clear the sudden, vivid intrusion. Where had that come from? It felt so real, so immediate, yet completely alien to my current surroundings. I looked back at the journal, then out the window at the overgrown grounds. The sudden vision had been so jarring, so out of place. I must be exhausted, I reasoned. The stress of the inheritance, the isolation, the sheer volume of work, it was getting to me. My mind was playing tricks, conjuring phantom memories from who knew where. I tried to recall what I'd had for breakfast that morning. Eggs, toast, my mind felt hazy. I could picture the kitchen, the sunlight on the countertop, but the details of the meal itself, the taste, the exact arrangement on the plate eluded me. It was like trying to grasp smoke. A faint tremor ran through me. It wasn't just stress. It was something else. The words about the forgetting, about the threads of self, seemed to hum with a new, terrifying resonance. My own mind, usually so sharp, so meticulously organized, felt like a tapestry beginning to fray at the edges. This wasn't just an old house with secrets. This was a predator, and it had already begun to feed. Their faces, gaunt and expressionless, turned slowly towards me, a collective, silent accusation. I jolted, my breath catching in my throat, the phantom chill of that stark room clinging to my skin. The image vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving me blinking at the yellowed page of the ledger in my hands. A mess hall during lockdown. The phrase was etched into my mind, a cold, alien presence. It made no sense. Yet the vision had been undeniably real, the clatter of those plastic trays, the hum of those fluorescent lights, the profound, unnerving quiet among the occupants. I rubbed my temples, trying to shake off the lingering disquiet. There was the isolation finally getting to me. Had the dust and decay of this place seeped into my thoughts, twisting them? I closed the ledger, the faint scent of mildew and old paper doing little to ground me. This wasn't the first oddity. I needed answers, something concrete to anchor myself against this creeping unease. The restoration work, once a meticulous comfort, now felt like a slow, deliberate unearthing of something best left buried. I abandoned the ledger, my hands trembling slightly, and made my way to the small study I'd set up, my laptop a beacon of modern sanity in the encroaching gloom. If the manor held secrets, the past might offer clues. I began with its documented history, sifting through online archives, digitized local records, and obscure genealogical sites. The initial searches were frustratingly sparse. The manor, once a prominent estate, seemed to have faded from public record with an almost deliberate efficiency after a certain period. I found scattered mentions of the initial owner, a wealthy merchant, and a few subsequent generations. Another, from the early 1900s, spoke of a woman who suffered a profound mental decline within the manor's walls, her family eventually moving her away, seeking a cure for her melancholia. The language was archaic, veiled, but the implication of madness was clear. A more recent forum post, tucked away on a local history enthusiast site, mentioned the manor as the place where Old Man Hemlock went peculiar. The poster recalled their grandfather speaking of Hemlock, a previous owner who had become obsessed with erasing his own past, burning photographs, tearing pages from diaries until he himself seemed to vanish. Leaving behind only an empty shell of a man, his memories apparently gone. Erasing memories. The phrase resonated with an unsettling familiarity. The more I learned, the less I understood, and the more the tension in the room thickened. The entity's influence, it seemed, was not content to merely observe. That night the nightmares came with a new ferocity. I was back in the mess hall during lockdown, but this time the occupants were me. Dozens of reeds, all gaunt, all silent, all staring. Their eyes were empty, devoid of recognition, and I felt a profound, terrifying emptiness blooming within my own chest. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. I tried to move, but my limbs were leaden. I woke gasping, tangled in my sheets, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. The fear was a living thing, squirming in my gut. The next day, the waking hallucinations began to intensify. The distinct scent of something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood, would occasionally waft through the air, only to vanish when I tried to pinpoint its source. Then came the memory gaps, small at first, innocuous. I'd walk into a room, forgetting why I'd entered. I'd misplace a tool I'd been holding moments before, but they grew. I found myself standing in the drawing room, a half-cleaned portrait on the easel, but I couldn't recall starting it. Had I eaten breakfast? The memory was a blank. I checked the kitchen, a dirty plate confirmed I had, but the act itself, the taste, the time, all gone. I began to doubt my sanity. I'd stand before a mirror, searching my own eyes for answers, for any sign that the man staring back was still me. The meticulous routine I'd always relied on, the precise order of my work, began to unravel. I'd find myself staring blankly at a piece of furniture, unable to remember the next step, the process, the very craft that defined me. The fragmented accounts I'd found now felt less like historical curiosities and more like premonitions. Disappearances, madness, strange occurrences. The entity wasn't just haunting the house, it was reaching for me, eroding the edges of my mind, blurring the lines between what was real and what was a horrifying, manufactured delusion. The image of those gaunt faces, their silent accusation, had burned itself into my mind even after the ledger page blurred back to its harmless yellowed state. I'd snatched my hand back as if burned, the chill of that phantom room still clinging to my skin, a frost that sank deeper than any January wind. My breath hitched. A ragged gasp caught in my throat, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to dislodge the lingering tendrils of that vision. When I opened them again, the dusty study was gone. A cold, metallic tang filled my nostrils, thick and cloying like old disinfectant trying to mask something fouler. The air vibrated with a low, insistent hum, a deep thrumming that resonated in my chest more than my ears. This wasn't the manor. This wasn't anywhere I knew. My eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the sudden, violent displacement. Long rows of stainless steel tables stretched before me, flanked by bolted-down benches. The walls were unpainted cinder blocks, scarred with grime and patched with what looked like hasty repairs. A faint, acrid smell of burnt coffee and something indefinably stale permeated everything. I was in a mess hall during lockdown. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Lockdown? Why? What was I doing here? My memories of the manor, of the ledger, of the entire painstaking restoration felt suddenly distant, like a dream I was struggling to recall. They were motionless, like statues carved from the prevailing gloom. My stomach twisted. I tried to call out, but my voice caught, a dry rasp that vanished almost before it left my lips. Then one of the figures at a distant table stirred. Slowly, with an unnerving, jointless motion, it turned its head. Its face was a gray blur in the distance, but I felt its gaze, a heavy weight pressing down on me. Then another and another until a dozen, 2 dozen silent witnesses were all facing me, their heads tilted just so, as if listening for a sound I couldn't hear. Who? No reply. Just that collective, unblinking stare. The humming intensified, vibrating through the soles of my feet, up my legs, into my very bones. It felt like the air itself was tightening around me. I know us, Reed. I don't know I'm an antique restorer. I work with wood, with metal, not. My hands, I noticed, were trembling, my fingers flexing uselessly. They felt strangely alien, not quite my own. One of the figures, a bulky form slumped at a table closer to me, slowly raised a hand. It was misshapen, the fingers too long, the knuckles distended. It pointed a single skeletal digit directly at me. You forget your work, you forget yourself. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I stumbled back, my hands flying out to brace myself against an invisible wall. The concrete floor seemed to tilt, the fluorescent lights swinging wildly above, blurring into streaks of painful yellow. My mind reeled. Antique restorer. Was that right? I tried to picture my workshop, the scent of linseed oil and aged wood, the delicate tools spread across my bench. The images were there, but they felt thin, translucent, as if painted on a sheet of glass that was slowly cracking. I remember, I gasped, clutching at my temples. I remember the manor, I remember the secrets, the ledger. The ledger is a lie, the voice hissed closer now, emanating from all the silent figures, from the very walls themselves. A construct, your construct, you built it, Reed, just as you built this. The skeletal hand beckoned, a slow, deliberate movement. Come, look closer. Against my will, my feet began to move. I shuffled forward, drawn by an unseen current towards the figure with the misshapen hand. As I approached, its features sharpened, no longer a blur. It was a man, or what appeared to be a man, but his skin was stretched taut, almost translucent over prominent bone. His eyes were wide, vacant black pools, the one I had been so painstakingly restoring. My breath caught. My box, I murmured, reaching out a hesitant hand. The figure's face dissolved, its features melting away like wax, revealing for a split second my own face. Gaunt, stretched eyes wide and vacant. I screamed, a raw, strangled sound that tore from my throat. I stumbled back, falling hard onto the concrete floor, my head striking the unyielding surface with a dull thud. Pain flared, a blinding white light behind my eyes. The humming intensified, an unbearable roar now, pressing down on me, crushing me. The figures at the tables began to rise, slowly, soundlessly, their movements synchronized, their blurred faces all turning towards me. Reed, Reed, Reed. My name, my identity was being devoured, absorbed into that endless, echoing hum. I tried to push myself up to run, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. Who was I? The manor, the restoration, the entity, it was all swirling together, a maelstrom of fractured memories and terrifying uncertainty. Had I created this? Was I the architect of this nightmare? The lines between what I knew, what I remembered, and what was being forced upon me had not just blurred, they had evaporated entirely. The endless hum had receded, but its echo vibrated in the hollow spaces of my skull. I pushed myself up from the cold flagstones, my limbs stiff, heavy, as if I'd been submerged in thick mud. The last thing I remembered was the swirling maelstrom, the terrifying certainty that my very name was slipping away. It felt thin, fragile, like a piece of parchment about to crumble. A tremor ran through me. I had to get out. This wasn't just about restoring an antique, it was about preserving myself. My mind, my memories, they were the foundation of who I was, and the Manor was systematically dismantling them. Each step was a struggle against an invisible current, a growing resistance that pressed against my chest. When I finally reached the doors, my fingers fumbled for the iron latch. I twisted, pulled, pushed with all my strength. The doors didn't budge. They were sealed, fused to the frame as if they'd been this way for centuries. I tried the windows, moving from room to room on the ground floor. Each pane was opaque with grime and a strange, crystalline growth that sparkled faintly in the dim light filtering through. They felt solid, unyielding, like thick slabs of ancient ice. I tried to shatter one with a heavy brass candelabra I found. The metal clanged against the glass, producing a dull thud, but no crack, no splinter. It was like striking a solid wall. I tried to remember the layout of the manor, the service entrances, the cellar doors. But my mind was a sieve. Corridors I knew intimately now twisted and turned, leading to dead ends or rooms I didn't recognize. It was a part of the manor I'd never explored, or so I thought. The walls were unplastered brick, rough and uneven, smelling of damp earth and something acrid like old lye. The passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. My breath hitched. I stood at the threshold of what looked like a mess hall during lockdown. The walls were bare, institutional gray, streaked with what looked like old water damage. A faint, cloying smell of stale grease and disinfectant hung in the air. This wasn't the manor. This couldn't be. Where were the ancestral portraits, the intricate carvings, the heavy tapestries? My mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the elegant, decaying manor with this stark, brutalist space. Had I been moved, there was this some kind of annex I'd never discovered. But the sense of absolute confinement of being sealed away was overwhelming. There were no windows, only a single heavy steel door at the far end, emblazoned with a faded, peeling sign that read, "Restricted access, no entry." I walked among the tables, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. There was no one here. Not a soul. The lockdown, but lockdown from what and who had imposed it? A flicker of memory, fleeting and indistinct, tried to surface. Something about a protocol, about containment, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The entity I knew was behind this. It wasn't just stealing memories, it was fabricating new realities, trapping me within them. I approached the steel door, testing its surface. No handle, no visible lock mechanism, just a smooth, impenetrable expanse of metal. I pounded on it, a desperate, futile gesture. The sound was swallowed by the vastness of the room, returning only as a faint, mocking reverberation. My gaze fell upon a small, dusty box mounted on one of the pillars supporting the ceiling. A communication panel, perhaps, a lifeline. I dragged a heavy bench over, climbed onto it, and reached for the box. It was a fire alarm, its red pull handle covered in a thick layer of dust. I pulled it. Nothing, no blare, no flashing lights, no distant shouts. The alarm was dead, or perhaps it had never been alive. My hands trembled as I stepped back down. The mess hall stretched out before me, an empty, desolate expanse. I tried to recall a phone number, any number, the police, a colleague, the estate agent. But their faces were blurry, their names just sounds, and the numbers were gone, replaced by a jumble of meaningless digits and static. It was like trying to catch water in a net. The entity wasn't just erasing my past, it was severing my present, ensuring my future was only this endless, terrifying isolation. I was trapped, not just by steel doors and unyielding walls, but by the very architecture of my deteriorating mind. The outside world, the concept of help, was becoming as abstract and distant as a half-forgotten dream. The lockdown, the word still echoed in my head, a cold, alien presence. I stood in the mess hall during lockdown, the fluorescent lights humming above, casting a sterile, sickly yellow glow over the empty tables. My footsteps, usually so precise, now felt heavy, clumsy, each scuff against the linoleum a jarring intrusion into the suffocating quiet. No staff, no other residents, just me and the oppressive silence. The rhythmic drip, drip, drip from beyond the far wall had intensified, growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't water, not truly. I could feel it in my teeth, a faint vibration, a dull thrumming that resonated with the burgeoning ache behind my eyes. I walked, drawn by the sound, past overturned chairs and a spilled tray of what looked like congealed oatmeal. The air grew thicker here, tasting faintly of ozone and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood mixed with dust. The far wall was a series of reinforced panels, scarred with scratches that looked too deep to be accidental. The drip, drip, drip was right behind it, a slow, viscous plop. I pushed the panel wider, the hinges groaning like tortured lungs. Beyond lay a small, unlit storage room, crammed with forgotten cleaning supplies and rusted kitchen equipment. But my gaze was fixed on the source of the sound. From a crack in the concrete ceiling, a thick, black fluid oozed, collecting in a shallow pool on the floor. It wasn't water, not blood, not oil. It moved with an unnatural sluggishness, reflecting the faint light from the mess hall like polished obsidian. And in its depths I saw flickers, faces, moments. My own face, younger, laughing, a colleague's stern expression, the manor whole and vibrant before decay set in. It wasn't a pool. It was a mirror, reflecting not just what was, but what had been. And then, the flickers coalesced not into images, but into understanding. A sudden, brutal clarity that slammed into me, cutting through the fog that had settled in my mind. It was a flood of fractured insights, memories that weren't mine, yet felt utterly familiar. They were the memories of others, absorbed, processed, and finally understood. The entity. It wasn't from space, not some alien horror. It was ancient, rooted in the very earth beneath the manor. A primal hunger that had lain dormant for centuries, perhaps millennia. It had been disturbed, unearthed by the foundations of the old house, roused by the constant churn of human life and thought above it. It didn't have a physical form, not truly. It was a consciousness, a parasitic intelligence that existed in the liminal spaces, feeding on the most fundamental aspect of human existence, memory. It was a slow, agonizing feast. It didn't just take memories. It consumed the very threads of identity, unraveling the tapestry of who a person was, thread by careful thread. It started with the periphery, the small recollections, the names of acquaintances, the details of a day. Then it moved inwards, devouring skills, experiences, relationships, until the core of the self was exposed. No, that was the truly insidious part. It replaced what it took with its own twisted simulacra, a horrifying, manufactured delusion that felt utterly real to the victim. My own confusion, the blurring lines, the sudden, inexplicable shifts in my perception, it was all its handiwork. The mess hall during lockdown wasn't just a physical place, it was a state of being. A containment, yes, but not necessarily for the entity, for us, for the remnants. It was a place where the last flickers of identity, the last desperate clinging to self, were processed, distilled, and ultimately offered. The others, the ones who were gone, they hadn't simply vanished. They had been consumed, their identities dissolved, leaving behind only husks, empty vessels, or perhaps nothing at all. Their memories, their very essence, now swirled in that black, viscous fluid, a nutrient broth for the ancient hunger. This wasn't just happening to me, it was happening through me. I was becoming an archive of its victims, a conduit for understanding its horrifying process. I understood now what it truly demanded. It wasn't appeased by fear or pain, not directly. It craved the exquisite complexity of human consciousness. To appease it, one could offer a continuous, slow erosion of self, a constant drip feed of fragmented memories, a gradual dimming of the light of identity, prolonging the agony for a little longer, perhaps for years. But the outcome was the same, eventual total consumption. To defeat it, that was a different, far more terrible proposition. It didn't want death. It wanted the ultimate sacrifice of identity. To defeat it, one had to offer something so potent, so pure, so utterly self-defining, that it would either overload it, poison it, or sate it completely, extinguishing its hunger forever. It demanded not a life, but a self. The entirety of one's core identity, willingly surrendered not as fragments, but as a whole, brilliant, burning ember. It meant offering the one thing I had fought so desperately to hold onto, the one thing it had been relentlessly trying to steal, my own, undiluted, uncorrupted self. To truly defeat it, I would have to become nothing. To erase Reed, the restorer, the man who remembered. It wasn't a choice between life and death. It was a choice between existence and oblivion, stretched in a silent scream. Lord Blackwood, his eyes, full of terror and a terrible emptiness, stared out from behind my— "No," I shouted, scrambling away, knocking over a stack of sandpaper. "Get out of my head." The air in the workshop grew heavy, pressing down on me. The hum of the dormant power tools seemed to vibrate with a low, malevolent thrum. The guards, I'd set up the motion sensors, the cameras seemed to mock me, their tiny red lights blinking like malevolent eyes. They weren't